It's December 1998, and 23-year-old Cheng has the world at her fingertips. She's a law student with honors at Queens College in New York City. She's already won multiple fellowships at well-respected firms and gone on volunteer trips all over the country to help provide legal support to underserved communities. She's on track to start a promising legal career, and she even has a really hot law school boyfriend who she plans on marrying after graduation. What more could a girl want? To manage the stress of law school, Catherine took yoga classes at the Integral Yoga Institute in Greenwich Village. She found the classes to be relaxing, and the yogis she met at the institute were friendly and supportive. As her winter school recess approached, Catherine won a scholarship for a 30-day trip to Yogaville, the capital of Integral Yoga International in the mountains of Central Virginia. It was perfect timing. She would spend the winter at a yoga retreat to relax and escape from the chaos of New York, then come back home 4 weeks later, ready to finish the academic year strong. Catherine packed her bags, kissed her boyfriend goodbye at the bus station, and promised she'd email him love letters every day while she was gone. She hugged her parents and told them she'd call. None of them expected what was going to happen next. I'm Brianna Patton, and this is Surviving Satchidananda.
Now to the story of a young woman with a bright future who suddenly abandoned everything and everyone, including her family. They claim she's been brainwashed, and as Les Trent reports, they're waging a fierce war to get her back.
After just 3 weeks at Yogaville, on January 11th, 1999, Cheng called her parents with a shaky voice and told them that she was never coming home.
Her distraught father screams that she was stolen from him by an insidious cult. Her jilted boyfriend protests she was lured out of his arms by a Hindu monk twice her age.
We were in love with each other, and we were considering getting married after graduation.
And now Cheng finds herself at the center of a raging battle for her heart and mind.
It's probably one of the most severe cases of brainwashing that I've ever seen.
In less than a month, Catherine had changed her name to Meenakshi, and instead of returning to her friends, family, boyfriend, and law school like she planned, she said she was going to stay in Virginia at the ashram and marry Yogaville's attorney, 51-year-old Swami Atmananda, also known as Larry Gross. When I was living at Yogaville, he was going by the name Sundaram. Catherine's parents were shocked and had no idea what to do. After weeks of trying and failing to convince their daughter to come back home, they enlisted the help of today's guest, cult specialist Rick Alan Ross. Rick is the creator of the Cult Education Institute, an online database that archives articles, survivor testimonies, and court documents related to hundreds of dangerous groups. He's testified as an expert witness in dozens of court cases involving cults. He's also worked with many families who credit him with saving their loved ones from the grip of destructive groups. Some even call him a hero. But if you take a quick look at Ross's Wikipedia page, you'll see that he is no stranger to controversy. Rick was charged and eventually acquitted on false imprisonment charges in 1991 related to a controversial method of cult intervention called deprogramming. See, back in the day when families were desperate to get their loved ones out of dangerous cults, they took desperate measures to try to bring their families back together. Many went as far as abducting the cult member, locking them in a room, and forcing them to consume information that showed their cult in a negative light. A lot of people who went through deprogramming say that their rights were violated and that they're traumatized from the experience. Listen to what Jason Scott says that his mother hired Rick Alan Ross and his associates to do to him.
I was jumped on by 3 men, handcuffed, duct taped, had a cinch strap put around my ankles, drug out to a van, and they pinned me upside down. Very, very violent and unneeded. And 4-hour trip down to Ocean Shores, and they tortured me for 5 days. They were trying to make me change my mind against my will. This man, he conned my mom out of $20,000 to do this to me.
Jason's mother and Ross, however, tell a different story.
I felt like if I leave him alone and he doesn't get this information, I may never see him again, ever. and I wasn't willing to risk that.
All Kathy really wanted, and all any of the parents that I've worked for really want, is just, can I have a few days to just talk with my kid? Can I and the rest of the family, the brothers, the sisters, can we just sit down and say, hey, we've got some concerns and we want to talk to you? What is wrong with that?
He was fed very well. He had a ping pong table. We played ping pong. He had a jacuzzi in the master suite. No, I don't think that's abuse.
And was not kidnapped. It was his own mother who hired me. It was her decision to intervene in her son's life in an effort to try and save him from a lot of unhappiness.
We had to do what we had to do.
After Rick was acquitted in the criminal trial, Scientology lawyers agreed to represent Jason in a civil case against Ross, which ended in a settlement. Rick has since stopped involuntarily deprogramming adults and advises against it. But he still has detractors that point to his lack of formal education and credentials. Ross is not a licensed therapist, and his highest level of education is a high school diploma. Despite his involvement in the famous Jason Scott case, Ross still had a reputation as an effective deprogrammer, so Catherine's family hired him to help. But the story gets even more complicated because Catherine later made claims that her family was abusive and she wanted to stay at Yogaville to get away from them. I've been trying to figure out what happened to Catherine for over a decade. Whenever I ask questions or search for information, I always come up to dead ends. So I invited Rick on the show to see if he could offer some more insight into this mysterious case. Is Rick Allen Ross a savior who helps people break free from dangerous cults? Or is he a con man who takes advantage of grieving families and infringes on people's religious freedom? But more importantly, what the hell happened to Catherine Cheng? Why would she throw away her future to marry a gross old man at Yogaville? Is Catherine a cult victim who was taken advantage of by an integral yoga swami? Or is she a survivor who escaped from an abusive family? My gut tells me the answer lies somewhere in the middle. My hope is that by the end of this conversation, I'll have some answers. Rick, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to talk about your experience with Yogaville and other cults.
Well, thank you.
So I'm pretty sure you've created one of the largest cult archives that's accessible to the public. Can you tell us a little bit more about what your research process looked like back then, and how are you getting information about these obscure groups?
Well, Brianna, my work goes all the way back to 1982 when I started. I actually launched what was rickross.com, but later became culteducation.com in 1996. And what was originally my private files. So basically, I had boxes and boxes of paper files about various groups that I'd gathered over the years. And I then decided, oh, this whole internet thing is happening and people are building websites. So I decided to build what would become really a very large database of information initially from my files. And then later I would be curating articles and organizing them in group subsections along with my web development team for many, many years. So now the culteducation.com is a 501c3 nonprofit charity, and we have hundreds of groups with subsections and just an enormous amount of documentation. And the goal is to have a history of these groups. What happened to them? Was there controversy attached to them? What were, if any, allegations of abuse that occurred? So it's all about these groups living with their history and people being able to get at it. And now with all the paywalls and obstacles online, it's good to have a free database where you can go and research and find the historical information.
Yeah, I know for me and others, it's been a great resource. You have been qualified and testified as an expert witness in a lot of criminal and civil court proceedings across the United States, including with the federal government. I'm wondering, how does the government determine that you are an expert? Do they look at a resume? Do they call your references? What did that process look like for you?
Well, the gold standard for an expert witness in a court proceeding is what's called a Daubert hearing. That's Daubert. And you go through what's called voir dire, which means that you go through a trial before a federal judge to determine before a jury is impaneled or the trial proceeds whether you meet the standard to be an expert. And so the lawyer that you are working with as an expert will initially question you, go through your CV, your years of experience, what is the nature of your experience, and so on. Have you published articles? Have you written a book? What is your history? And then the opposing counsel will then have the opportunity to cross-examine you and basically grill you over everything and try to have you knocked out, try to make it so that you will not be qualified. So I have been qualified, accepted, and testified through a Daubert hearing in United States federal court. And in addition to that, I've been qualified, accepted, and testified in 13 states across the United States. So I've never failed to be qualified, though there have been many attorneys that have opposed my qualification. I also have submitted by affidavit and report in a number of other states, including not too long ago at the request of the Attorney General of Guatemala. There is a cult group known as Lev Tahor, which is Hebrew for the pure ones. And this was a group led by a charismatic leader, Shlomo Helbrans, who is now deceased. And there were many children removed from this group in Guatemala, more than 100. And I had worked with families and victims of this group for a number of years. And I then entered a report that was used by the court in its determination regarding how to handle these children, what to do with them, and whether it was safe for them to go back into the compound near Guatemala City or not. Many of those children are now safe, removed from the group in Israel, the United States, and Canada with extended family.
So this is an international impact that you've had as well. I'm wondering, are there any experience that you've had in court that stand out?
Well, yeah. I mean, look, Brianna, I've been involved in a number of very high-profile cases. Not long ago, Eligio Bishop, otherwise known as Nature Boy, the leader of a group called Carbon Nation that you can see a documentary on Hulu about him. He went to criminal trial in Atlanta, Georgia, and I testified as an expert in court against him. And he was sentenced to life in prison, which he's now serving in Georgia. That was quite an experience, culminating after many years of receiving complaints and dealing with him online. Eligio Bishop is an example of a cult leader who used social media as his means of creating a cult following. He even, according to my information, used Airbnb to book retreats where his followers and he would live in Costa Rica, in Panama, in Mexico. Those countries pushed him out. They were not interested in him continuing in their countries, and he would eventually end up back in his home state of Georgia, where he was arrested and then went on trial and was convicted. I also testified at the trial of NXIVM cult leader Keith Raniere. And Keith Raniere sued me for 14 years. And shortly before he was arrested, and eventually he would go to trial and be convicted of sex trafficking, fraud, and various other things, he's now serving a more than 100-year sentence in prison. He objected to articles written by two doctors, a forensic psychiatrist and a clinical psychologist, that were published at culteducation.com. He wanted those articles offline. He didn't want people to see them. People that were involved in NXIVM were reading these articles and understanding things about the group that he didn't want them to understand. And so he tried to get those articles yanked. They never were. And he sued me for 14 years. I've been sued 5 times by different groups wanting information to be purged that is now at the database culteducation.com. I have never taken any of that information down, and I prevailed in all those lawsuits. In fact, they were all dismissed. They never went to trial. And I have to say, if it wasn't for generous, kind lawyers, they represented me at no charge, pro bono, for free, to protect my First Amendment rights and also to make sure that information remain online and that people could continue to be helped. So without those lawyers, the estimated legal fees for my representation would have exceeded $2 million. So many cults will try to break someone that is a critic or that has critical information, former member speaking out, a whistleblower. They will try to break them by suing and hoping that they can't afford the legal fees. And the cult will keep spending money and just try to basically wear you out in court.
How does being sued for 14 years straight impact you? Like, are you losing sleep? What's your personal life like when this is going on?
Brianna, at one point, I was being sued by 3 cults simultaneously.
Oh my gosh.
By Nexium, by Landmark Education, that runs a seminar series called The Forum. And then I was also being sued by the Church of Immortal Consciousness, which is an obscure cult that is in Arizona. And so at one point, I'm being sued by 3 cults. Also, what I didn't know is that Nexium had hired a private investigator that was putting me under surveillance, at one point going through my garbage. And there were at times threats against my life. At various points, I've been under the protection of the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Justice Department. In fact, I used to receive regular notices from the Justice Department about a group that had me on a hit list to be exterminated. So, yeah, it's been an interesting journey. And at times I've had my life threatened. I've been sued. I've been harassed. I've been surveilled, stalked. But you know what? They wouldn't do that if the database and the information on it wasn't perceived by them to be a threat. And by that, I mean that it was doing some good on the internet, that it was helping people to, sort out and unpack their experiences and exit a group that was doing harm to them. So the fact that these leaders and groups felt threatened by my work, I guess that's the closest I'll get to an award.
Well, I'm glad you had that legal representation because this archive is really important for a lot of people. You also did a lot of work or continue to do work directly with cult victims and their families with the process called deprogramming. Can you explain what deprogramming is and what that process may look like?
Well, deprogramming, which overwhelmingly has always been on a voluntary basis, but back in the 70s and the 80s, there were involuntary deprogrammings. And so let's, kind of separate that out and say that the overwhelming majority of interventions done to help cult members by their families with professionals has been done on a voluntary basis. And those interventions that were not voluntary, that were done with minor children, would be legal as long as their legal guardian is there and supervising the intervention. So what is deprogramming? Deprogramming basically means unraveling the programming of a cult to control people. Basically helping someone to understand how their individual autonomy, their freedom of thought, their critical thinking has been compromised by a group, how the group did it, and recognizing that by taking it apart and unwinding it and looking at it almost in like still frames, You're going through the whole process of indoctrination, and then you're unpacking it and you're looking at it and you're asking, is this coercive persuasion? Is this controlling? Did this process arrest your ability to critically think and evaluate things independently for yourself? In other words, how was your power taken away from you? And do you feel that that was justified? Do you feel that that's in your best interest? Because, in my opinion, people in destructive cults are under undue influence. They did not choose the group knowingly with informed consent, understanding all the implications of becoming a member, what the group would demand of you ultimately, how that might affect your life. Instead, they trusted people in the group who were telling them what the group wanted to say and concealing the darker aspects of the group and what cost it might be personally. And so deprogramming is asking all of these questions, examining it, taking out the research on coercive persuasion, on thought reform, on influence techniques, on coercive control, and then comparing that to the group experience and the dynamics of the group and asking, does the group do harm? Does the group exploit the members? And so if you're answering, well, yeah, we do have Swami Satchidananda. And yeah, Swami Satchidananda and his crew did teach us certain techniques of meditation that may have affected our critical thinking and our ability to make choices independently. And they did isolate us socially and cut us off from feedback from the outside, from an alternative frame of reference. And did we work for low wages or nothing? Did we support the organization at Yogaville? What did we do for the group? Was that in our best interest, or were we being exploited? So if you're answering yes to those 3 points, the group may be a destructive cult.
Yeah, I just remembered when you were talking about the exploitation of labor. I did the math recently and I was making $2.50 a day. But at the
Whoa.
time it's like, oh, this is a spiritual
Yeah.
experience and you're gaining so much from this. You don't really need the money.
Yeah,
I'm,
and
yeah.
Brianna, I'm not saying that meditation is a bad thing.
Mhm.
It can be a perfectly positive thing that can reasonably help people to reduce stress, focus on things. But if meditation is used excessively and repetitively, you have to recognize that when you're in a meditative state, you're highly suggestible. And in that suggestible state, a group can try to program your mind. And you can feel deeply swayed by that because you are in such a vulnerable and suggestible state, especially when you're isolated in an ashram or an intentional community where you're only really interacting with other people in the group who are constantly reinforcing the group's message. So, what the group does in that context is manipulate you through meditation. Because why would people work for such low wages and make so many sacrifices? As you say, because I feel I'm doing this spiritually. I'm doing this for the greater good of the group, of the world, because we're going to change the world. And the groups that I deal with that have been called cults constantly convince members of that to their detriment. And people sacrifice years of their life and even give up property, assets. I mean, Carole King famously gave a chunk of real estate in Connecticut to Swami Satchidananda, which he then sold and converted into the acreage in Virginia known as Yogaville. So, this is why people do things. I think if you ask Carole King today what she thought of Swami Satchidananda, she'd probably either say no comment or give you a look of disgust, because I don't think that at the end of the day, she was very happy with him. and she probably felt used by him. Though in the case of Carole King, she went on and is a very successful woman. But I mean, there are so many people that suffered under Satchidananda. And I know because over the years, they've been in touch with me. And I think that that is his legacy in large part. I mean, many people would say, well, oh, no, his legacy is his peace shrine and how pretty Yogaville is. But there were a lot of people that were hurt by Satchidananda. And I think that really remains as his legacy.
Yes, I try to reiterate on this podcast that two things can be true at the same time. You could have had a really good experience at Yogaville and had a peaceful meditation and yoga retreat, but also people have been really hurt. And we shouldn't ignore the people who are hurting and the people who are pursuing legal action because of the harm that they've suffered.
Well, you know, I dealt personally with the hierarchy at Yogaville
Yes, I want to get into that.
in the late 90s and the early 2000s. And I dealt with Asokananda.
Mhm.
I dealt with Prem, the psychologist there, Larry Gross, who I think has now passed away. He was the lawyer for Yogaville. And it was all over a very tragic, horrible story of a family that lost their daughter, Catherine Cheng. And I don't know what became of her. I know that she married Larry Gross. She then assumed a new name. And at one time, she was a yoga instructor in Buckingham. And she did, I hear, have a child.
Mm.
But it's just so sad what happened to her. Here was a woman who was really very, very brilliant, very intelligent. And she had done 3 semesters of law school in New York, and she was tired. She wanted to relax. She took some yoga classes at Integral Yoga in Manhattan, in New York City, and they told her about a scholarship where she could go to the retreat Yogaville for 30 days. She never came back. She ended up marrying a man 30 years her senior, Larry Gross, who was one of the swamis there. And her family desperately tried to communicate with her for over 2 years. And then finally, after much bad press and notoriety, Yogaville agreed to let her come home for 10 days. And she came to the family's home in Queens, New York, and I met with her. And I witnessed the incredible effect that Yogaville had on her and her family. It was devastating. They lost Catherine. I don't know if she may have reconciled with her family in recent years. She may not be associated with Yogaville today. I mean, it's been over 20 years since I met with Catherine Cheng. But I know that at that time, she was very spaced out in a trance-like state. She would meditate on breaks to reinforce her state of mind. And she had no emotional response to her family. At the end of the intervention, which failed, she had nothing to say. Her family, each one of them, said goodbye to her. She had a number of siblings, and I can remember them crying, in particular, her sister crying really hard and saying that they felt that they lost her, that they loved her, and everything. And she sat there emotionless, not a tear in her eye, in this kind of trance that I have to think that Yogaville had something to do with. And she eventually left, went back to Virginia, and that was the end of it. This was a very loving family, mom and dad with, I can't remember if there were 5 or 6 children, but they were very close, very tight family. And Catherine was the oldest child and much loved by her siblings, by her mother, by her father. And it was just heartbreaking to see what happened. And Yogaville had so many opportunities to do the right thing. And anyone who's listening to this podcast, go to culteducation.com, go to the Yogaville subsection, and read Matthew Cheng, Catherine's father, read his letter, read his statement of what actually happened, and all of the supporting documents, the marriage certificate, so many other things are archived at the database so that people can see that the Cheng family told the truth and nothing but the truth, and that everything is well documented, and that Yogaville really, really failed ethically, morally, to respond to this family and their pain. And it's just really a sad story. And in my opinion, it's an indictment of Yogaville and its hierarchy.
Yes, I'll be sure to put the link for that in the show notes for his letter. And then everyone who's listening, if you get to the bottom of that letter, you can click Yogaville and see the whole archive on Cult Education. This is such a mystery because I first got to Yogaville in 2015, and Larry Gross then was going by the name Sundaram. So eventually I had read the story of Catherine and Larry Gross, and then I realized, I was like, oh my gosh, this guy that we do worship ceremonies with every day on top of this mountain was the guy in this story, but Catherine was nowhere to be found. So if she had a child, she was not at Yogaville. I was there from like 2015 to 2020-ish, and he was there the entire time, and I had never seen Catherine.
Well, that makes me feel somewhat encouraged because, Catherine, this is a woman who was highly accomplished, brilliant. At the time that she went to Yogaville, she had a boyfriend who she corresponded with, who was also a law school student, and they were very much in love and planned on being a couple and getting married. Later, Yogaville would insinuate that everything was totally different, that the family was, an abusive, controlling family, and that she just fell in love with Larry after, I don't know, what was it, 30 days or 60 days? It was a matter of weeks from the time that she got to Yogaville until she married this man 30 years older than her, who I think, Brianna, you can attest to, was no Brad Pitt. So I mean, the idea that this was all spontaneous, that it wasn't orchestrated, that it wasn't manipulated, I think is, in my opinion, implausible. And one of the things that happened was that Catherine left behind her diary. She had no intention of moving to Yogaville forever. Her intent was, I'm going there for a 30-day program. I'm coming home. I'm resuming my education. I'm going to be with my boyfriend. And she had sent emails that confirmed all of that. And in addition to that, she left behind her diary, which I had access to. And it was handwritten. And it basically describes how much she loved her family and how much she loved her father and her mother and her brothers and everybody. And the idea that that wasn't the way it really was another one of the just incredibly corrupt things and harsh things that the hierarchy of Yogaville tried to perpetuate in their propaganda at the time that the story broke eventually in the news. So, all of that is very, very well documented. And all I can say is, if you didn't run into Catherine at any time during your stay there or hear about her being with Larry Gross, maybe she did break away from Yogaville. I hope so. I haven't heard from the Cheng family or from Catherine or her brothers for many years. So if they're out there and they hear this podcast, hey, please send me an email, rickross@culteducation.com, or contact me. I mean, I'm easy to get in touch with. So please, I'd love to hear from anyone to give me an update on what happened with Catherine Cheng, because I hope there's a happy ending.
Yeah, I hope so too. You mentioned a little bit about your interactions with the leadership at Yogaville. Can you talk more about that? Because those leaders, Prem, she went by Premanjali and now she goes by Premananda. And Ashokananda was the leader of the New York Institute, and he traveled from New York to San Francisco to Yogaville. What were your interactions with the leadership at Yogaville like?
There were interactions with Prem. There were interactions with Asokananda. At the time, keep in mind that Swami Satchidananda was alive. He did not die until 2002. So I would assume that he was aware of what was going on, though I'm sure that people would like to dismiss that or spin that. But my sense of it was that they didn't care about the Cheng family. They had no regard for them or their concerns, and they made it impossible for the family to spend any meaningful time with Catherine for a long period of time. I mean, her brother actually went to Yogaville, physically went there to try and find out what happened to his sister. And he found it impossible to spend any meaningful time with her. The father also. So it just seems to me that the people in charge, and certainly Prem was in charge, Asokananda was in charge, they had power at that time. They abused that power, in my opinion, and they were not willing to really work with the family and sit down and work things out. They hired a lawyer, by the way, and that lawyer represented them in regards to the family. And eventually, after 2 years from the time Catherine went to Yogaville, about 2 years later, she finally surfaced at the family's home as part of a legal agreement signed between the family and Yogaville that she would spend 10 days at their home. And that's when I met with her. So it was my experience dealing with their lawyer, dealing with them, with Larry Gross. My experience in particular with Larry Gross was that he was given to fits of anger, that he would rage at times, and the family worried about how that affected Catherine's life. At one point, at the very end of the intervention, we had been told by Yogaville that discussion of their marriage, their relationship, or Larry was off limits. And so we waited until the very end before she was scheduled to leave. And I brought up Larry Gross and his penchant for anger and raging. And I said to her, if he ever hurts you, if you're ever frightened, if you're ever concerned, you have your family. They're here for you. All you have to do is call them. They will take care of your travel arrangements. You can come and be with them as a place of safety. And her reaction to that was she ran out of the house. That was when she left. And I remember her father saying to me, she ran away when you said that. We lost her. And I said to him, look, we were at the very end, and this was something I know you wanted her to know, which was that no matter what happened in Yogaville, that you were there for her, and that outrageous behavior, anger, raging, meltdowns that Larry allegedly had are not okay, and that he might physically abuse her or emotionally and psychologically abuse her. And she should know that that's wrong, and that she can flee and come to the family as a place of safety, as a refuge, if that ever happens. And we agreed that as a parting message, that was the right message. And at that point, I think we only had a few hours left before her leaving for the airport.
Wow. I don't even know what to say because this was strange even for Yogaville, which is already strange. So I have no idea how, well, first of all, I remember hearing through the grapevine that Swami Satchidananda was aware that this happened, but he was just kind of stayed out of it and was like, they're adults. They can do whatever they want, which is also a pattern that we noticed. We've had a man named Maxim on the show who was the first man to go public and say that he was assaulted while he was in the care of Integral Yoga at 17 years old. And he told Swami Satchidananda about this, and he said, you talk too much. So I think there was very much just to ignore when these things happened. But after 2 weeks, meeting this guy and deciding to stay with him, it seemed like at the very least, Swami Satchidananda should have reprimanded Larry Gross, because as a Swami, you're supposed to be an example, and they talk about that all the time. And
I think that Larry Gross was a valuable member of the group because he was a lawyer, and he was providing his services at a very low cost, if any cost at all, to the group. I mean, he lived in the ashram, right? And he was part of the ashram. And so what were they paying their full-time lawyer? Room and board? That's a valuable asset, to have someone with a law degree that's representing your interests, and they're not billing you by the hour. So I think that that was the value that Larry Gross represented. And in fact, we have legal documents online that shows Larry Gross's status within the group as its attorney and as its legal representative. So I think that was really at the bottom of it. It was a business decision that Larry wanted to be the husband of Catherine, this attractive woman that was 30 years younger than him. It was totally inappropriate, and it was an abuse of power, an abuse of his position as Swami, in my opinion. And it represented just a horrible ethical breach. But I think that, per my view of it, that Prem Asokananda and Swami Satchidananda all felt the same, that we're just going to cover this up, we're going to bury it, we're not going to let her out, and we're going to go along with this because Larry Gross is our lawyer and he's an asset to the organization. He helps our bottom line, and that's what we really care about. Not very spiritual, but very materialistic and grounded in the business of the group.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense when you put it that way. I'm pretty sure he was the attorney for Yogaville when I was there, even in 2015 to 2020. And I want to talk more about the ethics behind that, because in this program that she was in, called the Living Yoga Training Program, or the Light Program, which is how I was introduced to Yogaville, they're very clear that everybody that is in that program is supposed to remain celibate, not engage in dating. This is a time for you to focus on yourself, for your spiritual development. And they tell the people who are not in that program, don't engage romantically or sexually with these people while they're in this program, to kind of keep them protected. So him being a Swami and breaking that vow of celibacy and the boundaries that were in that program was extremely inappropriate.
Well, and let's just again look at the most obvious explanation. He's a lawyer. She completed 3 semesters of law school. She's a young up and coming person who could be very useful to Yogaville. She's in her 20s. He's at the time, he's in his 50s, and he's getting older, and she's a young, new potential lawyer, or she can help them in one way or another, a very well-educated, very intelligent woman. And so they were thinking, well, let's just scoop her up. I think that was the attitude that they had. And it was totally inappropriate. I think the way they explained it at the time was, well, he's a lawyer and she's an up-and-coming law student, and they just hit it off. And then they were married. Well, I think it's quite a leap. I mean, let's just look at that. I mean, here's a woman who's involved in a relationship, a very loving, close relationship with another law student in New York, who she's planning to marry and live her life with. She goes to Yogaville for a 30-day program, never comes home, and is married within 60 days to a man 30 years her senior. Does that make any sense? Does that sound like her thinking what's in her interest? Or does it reflect their thinking what's in their interest? In my opinion, it shows that she became, I think, a pawn. That's
Hmm.
what it seems to me. And that Larry Gross was happy. They were happy to acquire her, but it wasn't in her best interest.
Yeah, and I remember being told by a senior person at Yogaville that Larry Gross was involved in a very, I don't remember the specifics of the case, but he was a lawyer on a very notorious case that was based in Chicago, and they had eventually made a Netflix documentary about this case. So I could see him potentially being like, "Oh, you want to be a lawyer? Well, I've done all these very famous things with my legal career," and using that as a connection point with her.
But at the same time, I heard repeatedly that he was given to rages, that he had a short fuse, that he could go into temper tantrums. Hardly the epitome of a spiritually mature, grounded, knowledgeable person that you would look at as a model of behavior. Instead, I think he was kind of a problem child at Yogaville. And in my dealings with him, he was very abrupt, very rude. He had no consideration whatsoever for the Cheng family and for their feelings. He just seemed to me to be a very selfish, rather egotistical person with just a volatile personality that could just go ballistic at the drop of a hat. Useful to Yogaville, I'm sure, but not somebody that they could really put out there and say, look, this is what all the meditation and spiritual work achieves, is someone like Larry. I mean, because if that guy reached the level of Swami, what does that mean? I mean, was he a Swami because he really had worked through the process of growing spiritually? Or was he a Swami because he was an attorney and he was useful?
I'm wondering how did Yogaville and your experience there compare with other high control environments that you've had experience with?
Well, I would say that that's one of the variables of destructive cults. They're not all equally destructive. So Yogaville is not Jonestown. They're not mixing the Kool-Aid with cyanide so that everyone will die. I mean, there are different gradations of destructiveness in groups. But where I think Yogaville is extreme is in the social isolation for the people who live within the community and how they are often cut off from family, old friends, or anyone that can offer them an alternative perspective and give them more accurate feedback about what's happening. And that's what groups do to people in order to control them. And that is isolate them, control their social interaction, their social life, and constrain them within a community that they dominate. So that if the person says, gee, I think this is crazy. We went to a class the other day and Larry Gross had a meltdown and he started screaming. And I thought, wait a minute, is that a Swami? Is that the way Swamis act? I thought he was like on a high spiritual plane. I mean, he just seemed like a nut. And instead of getting accurate feedback from somebody that you might talk to who would say, oh, wow, did that happen? That sounds terrible. That doesn't sound like a spiritually mature person. Instead, you're talking to another group member, and the group member reinforces whatever the group says. So they would say, well, why are you being so critical? Why don't you understand that he is a Swami and that maybe you actually are responsible for that moment as an unreceptive student resisting enlightenment? Maybe you created the environment that precipitated that moment for Larry. In other words, trying to shift it around and spin it and everything. And what ends up happening is instead of getting accurate feedback, the group, through its social isolation and group environment, is reinforcing this mindset and indoctrination. And that's why I would regard Yogaville as somewhat extreme, because they have that compound. They have Yogaville. And then I would say that they do a kind of bait and switch con. I mean, they have the light program that you mentioned, and you would think that that's something positive, but I would see it as bait to put on the hook to reel people in, because that's what happened to Catherine Cheng. I mean, she enrolled in that program thinking, I'm going to have a wonderful time for 30 days and go home. And it wasn't like that at all. And there are many groups that have ashrams in India and around the world that will entice people to do a program within their community with the idea that they will be leaving after a certain period of time. And I've had a number of complaints from a number of families about this, many families over the years, and they don't come home. And the family cannot visit them. They cannot get in. And that's what happened to the Chengs at Yogaville. They were not given meaningful access to Catherine. So that kind of an environment is extreme. And it's important to keep in mind that many cults do not have compounds, do not have group housing, and in that sense, they're less controlled. And so, in my experience, the more the demands of the group, the more the group wants to get from you, the more extreme the control mechanisms may be in order to produce compliance. So if I want you to believe certain things that are really difficult to believe, I isolate you within a community for a period of time, and you have no outside frame of reference. You have no one to tell you this is crazy. And I can control you, and then get the desired net effect and what I want to get from you. So the more extreme the group, the more extreme the control may be.
Yeah, I think one of the main things that keeps people there is the exploitation of labor, because like I dropped out of college to go to Yogaville, was making $75 a month, and after you stay there for a while, you can't leave even if you wanted to if you don't have money. People are stuck there financially, and they have to labor for Yogaville in that way. You have a lot of critics. You talked a little bit about how you've been sued many times. I'm wondering, how do you respond to people who say that deprogramming is just another form of coercion?
Well, it isn't, because really all it is in its pure form is education. So what you're doing is you're sharing with someone the research and the historical information about cults and how they operate. So, for example, there is the paper written by Robert J. Lifton, Cult Formation, which was published at Harvard in the 80s, in which Lifton distilled down to 3 core characteristics what is a destructive cult. So what you're doing in deprogramming is just discussing that. Do you have a charismatic leader? Yes, we do. Does that leader have any meaningful accountability through a constitution and bylaws and checks and balances? Or is the leader dictatorial? And is the leader the defining element and driving force of the group? Is the leader ever wrong? When can you think of the leader ever admitting, I'm wrong, or being corrected, or making an adjustment? And then second, you're going to talk to the person and say, let's talk about thought reform. So Lifton wrote the book, Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism. It has 8 core criteria to determine if a thought reform program is ongoing. For example, one would be milieu control of the environment. Does your group control the environment? Do you have an ashram, a compound? Another would be the sacred science of the group, which is that whatever the group teaches cannot be questioned in any meaningful way. It must be accepted. And if you do continue to persist with doubts or questions, you are wrong or negative. And then the dispensing of existence, as Lifton calls it, a we-they mentality. We are in the group, we have a right to exist, but those who leave or those who criticize us, I don't know about them. Do they have a right to exist? So ask yourself, if you're in a group, is there a legitimate reason to leave? If I want to leave, how will I be perceived? And for that matter, of the people I know of or have heard of that have left, how are they labeled? Do they come by and stop by and have a tea with us? Do we share a meal with them? Do we correspond with them? Can you still be friends with them? Or are they ostracized and labeled in a negative, dismissive way? That's the dispensing of existence. So in deprogramming, you're talking about what is thought reform. And then also you're talking about Edgar Schein's work on coercive persuasion. There are 3 stages to coercive persuasion: breaking people down, or Schein would say unfreezing them, and then manipulating them to change in their fluid state after they've been unfrozen, and then refreezing them, or as I would say, lock them in. And you do that through the control of information, the control of the environment, etc. And then there's a book written by Robert Cialdini, a professor of psychology at Arizona State University. It's simply called Influence. And Cialdini has the 6 principles of influence, like authority, that we are more compliant, obedient to people we perceive in authority. And that's why it was unethical for Larry Gross as a Swami to use his authority to end up with Catherine Cheng as his wife, because that would be considered unethical if a doctor did it to a patient. If, for example, a psychiatrist did it with someone that they are treating in therapy. So it was an abuse of authority. So Cialdini goes through different principles of influence, like authority, liking, the rule of reciprocity. If we feel that someone has helped us, we feel an obligation to return the favor. Has the group used any of these principles of influence to manipulate you? Have you gone through a breaking process, a changing process, a refreezing process? Are these 8 criteria that Lifton talks about in Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism applicable to you and your group now? You're talking about what damage the group has done and what research exists regarding that has perhaps been hidden from you. What do you not know about the group that you should know to make a more informed decision about whether or not you continue in your commitment? And then finally, the 4th block is your family, the people that are there in the intervention. I always have family there whenever I'm working with someone. And so they're going to explain why they're worried about you, what their concerns are as people who love you, who care about you. So you take those 4 blocks together. And by the way, Brianna, this is all detailed in my book, Cults Inside Out, How People Get In and Can Get Out. And there are chapters on defining a destructive cult and intervention, and there are case examples that are in the book so that people can understand what deprogramming really is, as opposed to these, very misleading characterizations that I've often seen that are sensational in the media, or perpetuated by cults who are afraid of deprogramming because it works.
Have your views on cult intervention changed over time?
Yes. I mean, I think so. I think that every time I do an intervention, and I've done hundreds, every time I do one, I learn something from the people that I work with, from the person that is in the group, from the family. And I think I've improved over the years in the way that I explain things and in the way that I interact with people. And I'm always learning. And there's also new research coming out. For example, there's been quite a bit of new research about coercive control, and that's been made into law regarding abusive controlling relationships. And one of the things that I think has really informed my work is working with people that are in abusive controlling relationships and realizing that a relationship between an abusive partner and a victim partner is very similar, if not identical, to the dynamics of a destructive cult. The difference is you just have one leader, one follower, as opposed to one leader and multiple followers. But much of the things that we understand in coercive control, such as gaslighting, which would be a parallel to what Lifton calls mystical manipulation, and other aspects of such relationships are identical to what goes on in a cult. And I think that's informed my work a great deal.
I want to be respectful of your time. Is there anything you want to say to the listeners, maybe the people who are still at Yogaville who are listening to this? Any final words?
I would say to the people at Yogaville, Satchidananda probably wasn't who you thought he was. I know that, he's buried there at Yogaville, and you probably visit his grave and think he was a wonderful and heroic man. But there are a number of women, and I want you to know that I have spoken firsthand to those women that say that he sexually exploited and abused them. And the fact that they came forward, and a number of them did, and their statements are online at culteducation.com. And I would say that really contradicts his image as this selfless, celibate, spiritual man. According to these women who had firsthand experiences with him, and some of whom I've spoken with directly, he was not that man. So if you think that this is some wonderful spiritual retreat, that the narrative is that it was founded by this awesome guru, that the facts appear historically to contradict that. And I would invite you to read and explore all of that information and understand that Yogaville is more of a business concern that's probably at this point worth certainly millions of dollars. I mean, their real estate holdings alone in New York and in Virginia are quite substantial. I don't know what their cash on reserve, but they're a business. And that business is perpetuated by low-cost labor of devotees like the people who are there right now. And I invite you to re-examine what happened. And I would also say it would be good for you to take a break, to just unplug from Yogaville and go see family and old friends and meditate on what alternative facts there are and criticisms of Yogaville. Instead of being submerged in that subculture, be with your friends and family for a while and see how that works for you.
Y'all, I went into that conversation wanting answers, but I just came out with more questions. But you know what they say, as your knowledge expands, so does the periphery of your ignorance. I want to remind you all that this is not an objective show, and I am not claiming to have a neutral perspective. I'm following my own curiosities about a place that I used to live, and I'm just taking you along for the ride with me. You all should know by now that I have a bias against Yogaville. I don't think it was appropriate for Larry Gross or Sundaram or Swami Atmananda or whatever the hell his name is to come on to Catherine. And frankly, I would have been pissed if my parents had hired a man accused of kidnapping to deprogram me. You should take all of that into consideration when you are forming your own opinions about integral yoga or Rick Ross or anything that we discuss on this show. One thing I do know for certain, though, is that multiple women spanning across decades have reported that they have had the misfortune of dealing with misogynistic, abusive men at Yogaville, and most of these women are not happy with how the leadership of the organization handled the situation. I'm also letting you know now that I'm going to be telling everyone that I interviewed Rick Ross, and I will not be specifying which one. Surviving Satchidananda is a one-woman show. I do all the research, writing, editing, producing, and I do not make any money doing this yet. If you want to support me or the show, click the link in the show notes to buy me a coffee. You can find more information about Rick, his book, the Cult Education Institute, and more in the show notes too. I'm Brianna Patton. Thanks for listening to Surviving Satchidananda.